Well, I also want to thank the organizers, the North-South Institute, for this fantastic event. In fact, so much important and interesting thoughts have been brought together and has been expressed already today that it's hard for me to find a space with some additional ideas. But I will try. I mean, the subject of our session here is institutional challenges and opportunities. And I think you probably will all agree that the key to harvesting the benefits, the inclusive development, as Pedro has put it, from the natural resources wealth of Africa, the key lies with better governance. Governance not only in Africa, governance also in the global community, where we have seen a lot of failures of good governance, not only during the colonial and post-colonial times, but also most recently. And of course we have to distinguish between two types of governance. One is the more general governance, the question of the checks and balances, the rule of law, accountability, corruption in governments. And there, of course, many initiatives are underway, and I am very proud to say that Transparency International has taken deep roots in Africa, and I'm very happy to see Huguette Labelle, my successor at Transparency International, here in front of me, and congratulate her for this wonderful work. And this is important, this more general governance, because we want to have a sector which is properly regulated. In Germany we talk about soziale Marktwirtschaft, social market economy. Yes, we want to entrust the main function of economic development to the markets, but we want to have an authority, a legitimate authority, to regulate the market, to regulate it in terms of protecting it against abuse and against monopolization, against an excess of private power. But we also have to regulate it in terms of correcting the outcome of the market from time to time. Somebody talked today about the need to have a visible hand. Yes, it is a visible hand we need to complement the invisible hand, which is nowhere to be seen sometimes. So this element of governance is in Africa, of course, still incomplete, to put it very mildly. I was very pleased to hear today from the representative of the African Capacity Building Initiative that he feels that things are much better, that things have improved. Yes, they have improved, but I think in general we should be very much aware of the fact that there is still a lot of work to be done, and not only in Africa. Let's not forget that the rich countries, the OECD countries, have until 1999 allowed, encouraged, subsidized systematic corruption by their companies in Africa. And we still have the legacy of this in our countries. Even in Germany, where we are prosecuting at present about 120 very respectable international companies for bribing outside Germany. Even there, you still find a lot of people who say, if you go into the international market where there is no governance, you have to do what everybody else is doing. You have to bribe. And this is particularly so in the extractive industry sector, where the temptations for corruption on both sides are particularly high. On the side of the hand that lives, that gives, it is a very high temptation to spend a few $1 million in order to protect the continued operation of a one-sided deal which brings billions of dollars into the transactions. But also, of course, in the hand which takes and demands, and they are still there, the kleptocrats in Africa and in Latin America and in Asia. The temptation is great to open bank accounts in tax havens or in other safe places in order to protect the future and their personal benefits of this power elite in many countries. So even that area of global governance is still imperfect and still needs a lot of attention. But I would say the specific extractive industry and natural resources governance is even more complicated. As we have seen in the presentations, for instance, of the African Mining Vision and also of Jim Cust right now for the Natural Resources Charter, it is really a universe of very complex areas of governance which all have to be coordinated, which all have to fit together, not only in the sequential context which the decision chart of Jim Cust represents, but also in the sense of facing the sector as it exists in some country, which has been based on decisions which have been taken many years ago and which are still very important in order to create benefits for the people. And it is in this context that the question of capacity to deal with each step, which each criterion, which each element of this universe of good governance, the enabling environment, as it was called this, today, is very much lacking in many parts of the world. I mean, if you look, for instance, at the totality of operations which are necessary to turn from the resources in the ground to proper investment of the revenues from developing these resources, there are so many different stages, and at different stages each time you have to have different resources, different capacities. And let's go, for instance, after the decision has been taken to develop a resource, to the negotiation. In many conferences you hear today that there is still this asymmetry of negotiation capacity. And indeed, it is quite clear if a major international company enters into a small, say, African country in order to invest several $billion in developing a resource, they come with a very powerful team, not only of good lawyers from London and from New York, but also with geologists, with financial analysts, with all the expertise which is necessary in order to make sure that this deal becomes a success for the investor. And who is sitting on the other side of the table? In many cases, it's perhaps a minister, perhaps a permanent secretary, perhaps with a few very good people. Like in Liberia, they have a number of very good people, but it is a small and fragmented team, totally overworked. I mean, Natty Davis in Liberia, for instance, he is running in very small circles, renegotiating, negotiating, discussing ongoing operations, which, in my opinion, totally overwhelm the capacity which in a country like Liberia, which since 50 years has been a natural resources country with many, many negotiations under its belt, is totally inadequate. So what do you do in a situation like this? And we are right now, for instance, involved in a series of meetings to see whether we cannot create a negotiation support facility, which would at least make available rapid action teams which can come into play as soon as the government demands this kind of support. I myself, I was in Botswana 40 years ago as a young lawyer, and I saw how this country managed to coordinate these different aspects of mining by facilitating a strong interministerial team, and how they very judiciously brought in the expertise which was necessary. And I think we need this type of building of capacity in this little slice of the value-added cycle of the development of a resource. So here we are talking about negotiations, and what has to be negotiated? Practically everything which has to enable the host government and the people in the country to implement sound policies in all these areas which have been mentioned for the precepts, for instance, of the Natural Resources Charter. It has not to do only with the sharing of the benefits. Yes, this is extremely important, taxes, dividends, royalties, other types of transfers to the government, how these are distributed and so on. But this is only one small slice. There are many other slices of the negotiation which include the environment, which include the human resources development, training, labor relations, the treatment of local populations which will be affected. And all these things have to be in the negotiation in order to enable a combination of laws and policies and institutions in the host country to implement what is a sound policy. And of course it goes all the way downstream to the use of the revenues, to the economic management of the country, macroeconomic management, the sovereign wealth funds. All of these things have to be created through a negotiation which is far-sighted enough and comprehensive enough in order to give the space for the local decision makers and the people to do the right thing, to turn mining and natural resource development into inclusive development. So how is this developing? How is this going in Africa? There are many, many initiatives. Some people feel one should try to combine them, one should have a one-stop serves all center which offers support to everybody. But the question is, of course, not only a cognitive one, a professional, a technical one. It's also a question of credibility and of political will. Whom can you trust? Who is objective enough? Who can be really seen to have the interests of the host country at heart? Who wants at the same time to serve, for instance, their own economy? For instance, I'm very suspicious about hearing about this sort of win-win situations, because whenever a donor agency tries to serve its own constituencies, its own community, its own business community, while helping a partner country in Africa, this becomes a rather tenuous exercise. I think we should find ways in which we focus on the interest of Africa. And then if this also helps the donor economy, the donor community, all the better. So this is, in my opinion, the challenge and at the same time the opportunity. We have a question of political will. Political will has to be, to some extent, created and supported by creating the demand for good governance. And in that sense, I'm very much with the speakers today who said we have to create the awareness, the understanding of the people in order to, at every level, at the local level and at the higher level, to demand good governance. But it also has to be created in the home countries of the investors. It has to be created within the companies. And yes, I agree, we are probably in a very positive trend, but we have to do much more in order to create a global environment in which corporate responsibility and ethical investing will be not only a good business, but also will be serving the world altogether. And of course, the experience which I made as some kind of a magical approach to finding the combination of these different constituencies is multi-stakeholder approaches. At the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, we created a global multi-stakeholder governance which will guide multi-stakeholder working groups in the about 40, now 37 participating, implementing countries. It is this multi-stakeholder approach, both at the global level and at the local level where the work has to be done, which has created the credibility of this group. But of course the multi-stakeholder approach is only available where there is a modicum of consensus, of agreement between these various actors of governance. And that meant that in the case of the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, we had to be very narrow in interpreting the mandate. We couldn't go too far into areas where perhaps one or the other constituency be they the oil man from Houston or the enthusiastic and daring civil society activists from Global Witness, where they could still agree. So it was for us a focus on the borders of this consensus, which was challenged from time to time when, say, the companies were very angry because I supported, for instance, the Dodd-Frank Act. On the other hand, the representatives of civil society were very angry when we tried to bring in countries which didn't allow their civil society to play an active role through harassment and intimidation, try to limit their activity. So this was a very interesting exercise, but in my opinion, this is a model which one can apply at the various stages of this added value cycle with changing actors. Because at the end, when you start spending the revenues which you have gained from natural resource development, you may have a different group of people who have the expertise and have the commitment to work there with their partners in a magical triangle of good governance in order to find the right solutions. So this is from the experience I gained with EITI and even more so with the Transparency International, a recommendation which I would make to overcome this problem of failing political will. So we need a tremendous focus on strengthening capacities, partly by a short-term injection of external help, but also through training and longer-term support in the countries. And we have to try to deal with the question of failing political will by mobilizing and giving a voice to civil society. So these are the lessons which I would like to share with you. If we manage to do this, we can probably help Africa to begin to harness the benefits of its natural resources wealth. I'm a member of the Africa Progress Panel. This very week we are going to publish our report of this year, which also will have as its theme natural resources governance for Africa, and will be presented at the World Economic Forum meeting in Cape Town and later in Addis, where I hopefully see Antonio Pedro again. And there we take the same line. We need good governance, both in terms of political will and in terms of capacity building. Thank you very much.